evening, everybody. It is June 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. It's time for another live episode of The Breakdown. Got notes and everything, little scribbles on them. We're very prepared. Got a big show tonight. We got a lot of topics that we're going to cover. Hopefully it's not going to be another Lord of the Rings length episode, but we got a lot that we're going to talk about because as much as the legislative session is over, there's still a lot of things that are going on. And of course we are going to get towards the end of the episode, we're going to get a little bit into the whole thing of the water situation here in Calgary. But to start things off with a bang, if you will, we got to have a little talk about, let's call it media. We have a problem with media in certainly this province. And we talked about it before. There's a very strong ecosystem that exists on the more righty side of the spectrum where you have these pundits and you have these people who will... what's the word I'm looking for? Pander. We'll go with pander. All of these people who will pander, they'll go for the most sensationalistic thing. And they're part of organizations that are either sort of the legacy mainstream media organizations that have some credibility, or they're part of manufactured media organizations, new media, that are run out of post offices in downtown Calgary that are trying to manufacture credibility through rage. It's all a very strange ecosystem. But the problem of bad media that we're going to talk about tonight has to do with, and he's probably going to block us again. He unblocked us for a little while. It was very confusing. And then he's probably going to block us after tonight because we're going to talk for a second about none other than the Stapler. We gave him that nickname. It's not very creative. David Staples, for anyone who's unfamiliar, David Staples is a columnist with one of those old school newspapers up in Edmonton. Ostensibly, he's supposed to, we think, write about sports, but he also wades into just about every other issue possible. And we're going to do a little bit of a case study on David Staples tonight. So on June 8th, David Staples tweeted out just before noon an anti-trans tweet from the American College of Pediatricians. And the tweet was pretty gross. The American College of Pediatricians tweeted out a group of pediatricians, medical organizations, and policy organizations have signed a declaration urging a stop to the promotion of harmful interventions on children with gender dysphoria. Comment and repost if you agree, then sign the declaration at doctorsprotectingchildren.org. Now, most people would take a look at that and go, wait a second here. They're saying that this petition, this declaration is signed by pediatricians, medical organizations, and policy organizations, but they're opening it up to the public. Gosh, that would almost seem to dilute the level of expertise. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem legitimate. This feels like astroturf. But if you're David Staples, no. You lean into this. And you lean into it in a big way. David Staples tweeted out, like we said, on June 8th, huge news. A.B. Danielle Smith, he tagged her because he wants her to know how much he just thinks she's so awesome. And Alberta was way ahead of the curve on trans issue. Now, it's not like he's a writer and should know grammar, but moving on. When will @Nenshi and @Justin Trudeau finally follow the science and the experts and stop supporting the disaster of massive medical transition of children? #ABLedge, #Canadian Poly. And a lot of people said, oh, David, I don't know about this. Their petition, it seems vaguely unusual. And anybody who took the 3 seconds to highlight and copy paste the American College of Pediatricians would have very quickly seen they are not at all a credible organization by most measures. From Wikipedia, the American College of Pediatricians, ACPEDS, is a socially conservative advocacy group of pediatricians and other healthcare professionals in the United States, founded in 2002. The group advocates against abortion rights and rights for gay, queer, and transgender people. ACPEDS, ACPEDS, promotes conversion therapy and purity culture, because the Jesus in the medicine always goes so well. As of 2022, its membership has been reported at about 700 physicians. That's across the entire United States. Somebody did the math, and it's less than 0.1% or less than 1% of all physicians are part of the AC PEDS, branding concerns aside. And a lot of people said, David, what are you doing? Come on. You're a mainstream writer. You should do better. This isn't right. Come on, David. Do better. And so David responded in the way that responsible, serious journalists, columnists do. He pinned the tweet. He pinned it. He pinned it to its profile. So anyone going to see David Staples' profile would see this lie, I guess, this falsehood, this promotion of an astroturf group from the United States that has far-right religious leanings. Anybody would going to his thing would see that. So that's super bold choice. And apparently there was enough of a furor over it that eventually David Staples decided to just delete it. He just deleted the tweet. No apology, no correction, none of that. He just quietly deleted the tweet, almost as if, and this is purely speculative, his bosses said, "What are you doing? Stop it now." So that's not great. And a lot of people would say, he's a sports columnist. Who cares what David Staples has to say about policy issues? And that's why we got to talk about David Staples tonight, because it turns out there is at least one person who very, very much cares about David Staples and his policy views. And that one person is the premier of the province. This is just a small sampling of a few of David Staples' opinion pieces, columns that Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, has used to prop up her positions. It appears that David Staples' propensity for writing fan fiction, I don't know what to call it, that serves Danielle Smith's purposes is not a new phenomenon at all. And this is the ultimate problem. Because we have a media ecosystem that exists in the province of Alberta now, where people don't know who's going to be coming to them and trying to present them with credible information, the best version of the story. People don't know that anymore. You have people on the left who looked at anything that's owned by Post Media and immediately dismiss it because a lot of it is it's owned by a lot of people who have some very far-right conservative views. But there are good journalists who work at post-media outlets. There's no question about that. There's also other ones. But this is the fundamental problem, because you have on the right a boatload of media organizations that are stepping up, and they're saying to folks, "Hey, we're credible, and we're not the mainstream media. We're very serious journalists, TM or whatever, and you should listen to us." And people go, "Oh, we should listen to them," as if they're journalists. And there's a big difference between punditry and journalism. And the ability of people to determine the difference is becoming only more and more eroded by the fact that there are people out there who will identify as journalists and not hold themselves to any journalistic standards, not hold themselves to any sort of editorial control. They'll just go out there and they'll do everything they can to get Danielle Smith to like them, because it seems like David, I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but maybe David is concerned about all of the cuts that are going on with the post-media world. And maybe David's whole thing, maybe the reason why David Staples is such a, I believe the kids say, stan for Danielle Smith, is he's hoping to land himself a press secretary gig, much like a former Western Standard creative writer. That's just speculation, though. But speaking of the Western Standard, we got to have a little chat about them tonight. We've been spending a lot of time talking about the Western Standard, but they keep making themselves relevant to the conversation. So here we go. For anybody who is unfamiliar, there was a federal bill called Bill C-18, the Online News Act. And we don't normally do the federal politics, but it quickly became a political football, as will be seen throughout the show tonight. Quickly became a political football for a lot of folks who were like, I don't like the federal government, and I think that sounds scary, so I'm going to be as hyperbolic about it as I can possibly be. In a nutshell, and no legal scholars currently at the show. I'm certainly not one. So take it with a grain of salt. But in a nutshell, what the Online News Act was designed to do is to say, hey, if you run the Strathmore Town Gazette, he said, hoping that's not a real newspaper, and you publish online news stories about things that happen in Strathmore, and then people share them to Facebook or Facebook groups, and then people go to Facebook to get their news and to read your article. Well, you're doing all of this work to create news, local news, which is a dying art. You're doing all of this work to create news, and in the process, what's happening is you're not seeing any benefit for that. You're not getting any traffic. You're not getting any of the things. Facebook is using your content as the content of Facebook to get people to continue coming to Facebook so that Facebook can get the advertising revenue of people continuing to come to Facebook. And that's not fair. And it's one of the reasons why so many small news organizations have been struggling as hard as they have. So the federal government said, hey, you know what? That's not right. If you're going to share other people's or become a source for other people's content, you should have to pay them some sort of dollar amount in order to get to access their content. And a bunch of news organizations on the right, the pundit side, lit their hair on fire. We did a whole section on this when we did our Western Standard episode a couple of weeks ago, which if you haven't listened to, you totally should, because it's so good and very funny at points. We did a whole thing about how the Western Standard, True North, The Rebel, all of these people lit their hair on fire because C-18 was just going to make things absolutely impossible for anyone to make any money because the Facebook and the Google. And Google originally said, when they came out with C-18, Google originally said, hey, you know what? We're not huge fans of this. Therefore, we're not going to support it. We're not going to be showing news links, Google said. We're not going to link to news stories in Canada anymore. We're just going to shut it down. And everybody went, it'll make it harder to find news. And they're not wrong. But that's not an insignificant part of Google's traffic. People looking for current events, people looking for news stories. And it turns out Google, they see the value of it too. But again, it's important to highlight, in particular, how the Western Standard was so upset. Publisher and alleged chaser of children, Derek Fildebrandt. I can actually say that. That's wild. Derek Fildebrandt tweeted out in 2023, on October, he said, "We've refused to take the federal media subsidies until now, but the effect of C-18 will kill or stop the growth of profitable media innovators. I have called an emergency meeting of our board of directors to consider our response to the latest predicted and inevitable consequences of C-18, because you see, C-18 is going to destroy it. There's going to be no way for these small media operators like the Western Standard to pay their bills, to make any kind of money. It's terrible." And he was actually retweeting himself where he said, "News Media Canada and the federal government are white-collar criminals engaging in legalized theft to take money they did not earn and destroying disruptive new challengers to pay the cost of their corporate greed." So you see, this whole thing is it's a scheme made up by white-collar criminals to get money that they didn't earn directly. That gets relevant in a minute, I promise. Derek Fildebrandt also tweeted out on November 21st of 2023, "As long predicted by those of us paying attention, Bill C-18 is such a clusterfuck and destroyed the industry so badly that Ottawa is resorting to increased bailouts. How long can media entrepreneurs hold out against this madness?" And he was retweeting Michael Geist, who tweeted out, government bailing out Canadian news outlets as impact of disastrous bill C-18 becomes clear. It will now cover 35% of journalists' labor costs and has increased the per employee claim from 55K to 85K. News Media Canada lobbying pays off. So you see, don't you? If you were taking the big government's, the federal government money, because if you're taking money for provincial government advertising or sole source contracts, that's different. Shh, nobody talk about that. But if you were taking the federal subsidy money, then you were a very, very bad poodle. And there was no way that the industry was possibly going to correct itself. It couldn't be done. There's no way that Google would sign a deal. Oh, Google signed a deal. Google signed a deal. On June 7th. Google signed a deal. The government of Canada's deal with Google was more or less finalized when Google agreed to pay $100 million a year to news companies, just as the Online News Act was designed to force tech giants to do. So the Online News Act was designed to force the tech giants to pay the money, and Google stepped up with $100 million a year in perpetuity that will go to smaller news outlets. The Canadian Journalism Collective was created in May to handle the distribution of the money at arm's length from the federal government. So Google is going to give $100 million a year to the Canadian Journalism Collective, who will then disseminate it to all of the little news companies across Canada. According to the Canadian Press, small print and digital outlets can expect to receive about $17,000 per journalist that they employ, an official with the Canadian Heritage Department has said. Let's have some fun with some math, shall we? But before we do, it's important to note that Google, when they did this process, when they said, hey, you know what? We're going to give some money to the little guys. We want to make sure that independent journalism, small journalism can continue. So this is what we're going to set up this fund for. But hey, we don't know who you all are. It's not like we're Google. So we're going to need y'all to submit. Anybody who wants to be a part of this process, anybody who wants to be a part of getting their hands on this money for journalism, here's what we need you to do. We need you to do a submission. Raise your hand, let us know who you are, and then we can go through the process of making sure that you get your share of the money. And they released the list. And on that list, and you have to know what's coming next, we have the Western Standard. Not once, but twice, which is awesome in so many different ways, because the Western Standard News Media Corp applied to be part of this $17,000 per journalist, not only for the Western Standard, but they also applied for the previously launched, but now almost impossible to find, Alberta Report, because the Western Standard relaunched the Alberta Report a while ago. So the Western Standard, for both of its separate wings, we'll say, applied for both of its separate organizations. Now, from everything that we can see on their website, the Western Standard has 4 journalists currently listed on their website, which means they will potentially be pulling down the better part of $100,000, which is no small change. And because you can't find the Alberta Report website in places, it's conceivable that those same 4 reporters may also be working for the Alberta Report branch of the Western Standard as well, or maybe they have other reporters. We don't know because we couldn't find the website. But it's included in the submission. So theoretically, if it's the same 4 reporters or even more, the Western Standard could be pulling down upwards of $200,000 a year because of the federal government saying news should be paid to create content. And another interesting little note, a little subheading. We also noticed when we've been taking a look at the Western Standard website since our Western Standard episode went up, they've stopped all of their government of Alberta little tiny banners that they were getting paid for the last couple of years for. They've stopped all of that. So maybe thanks to the feds making sure that the Western Standard is now getting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, they don't need that provincial contract anymore. So maybe they can just afford to. Moving on from there, we got to talk a little bit about the healthcare voucher program that has been introduced in the province of Alberta. The government launched the program, and this comes from a story by Carrie Tate. The government launched the program known as Client-Directed Home Care Invoicing as a pilot project in Edmonton in the spring of 2022. Residents who qualify essentially receive government vouchers to pay for or subsidize home care provided by businesses of their choosing. So rather than having a person when you need home care, rather than having one of the people who does those referrals saying, oh, you have to go with the AHS home care program or any other home care program, rather than them saying that, if you choose to go with the client-directed home care invoicing, you can choose any private company that you like to provide your home care. But there's some problems, because the home care duties blur the lines a little bit between medical care and just, hey, we're going to help you stay at home. So home care duties range from yard work to laundry, to helping patients bathe, and to monitoring medication. So it's not quite health care proper by most standard definitions, but it does appear to be a little bit of healthcare, because you have people who are going to be helping people manage their medications. Presumably, if they're getting help managing their medications, it's because they have some difficulty managing their medications on their own. They're going to be helping people to bathe. Presumably, that means that these are people who otherwise would have difficulty bathing on their own. So by that very definition, we're talking about a vulnerable subset of people. This isn't just the neighbor kid coming by to mow the lawn and clean up the leaves. This is maybe the neighbor kid coming by to mow the lawn, clean up the leaves, and if they're hired by one of these companies, also help you with your bathing and your medications. The care providers are not held to the same training and safety protocols of Alberta Health Services and its contractors, which must adhere to the province's continuing care service standards, the legislated minimum requirements for firms delivering publicly funded care. And here's the scary part. This is the part that should really have everybody going, wait, what? Because as I just finished saying, we're talking about people who are having difficulty managing their medications and who can't potentially bathe themselves in some of these areas. When we're talking about people who are having difficulty managing their medications, you have to be open to the fact that there's the opportunity for some cognitive impairment going on, whether or not we're talking about developmental disabilities or whether we're talking about things like earlier stages of dementia, and we're using these types of programs so that people can stay in their homes. We're talking about vulnerable people who don't have the full resources at their disposal that maybe you or I do. Patients are also responsible for monitoring the quality of care under the client-directed model. And that's the part that should have everybody standing up and saying, wait, what? Because if you have people who are vulnerable, making them the ones who are responsible for ensuring that the care is what it's supposed to be and operating under the assumption that none of these providers will say, no, this is exactly what it's supposed to be when it's not, is not only a little bit naive, it's straight up dangerous. Especially because after that story went out, we started receiving multiple DMs where people were telling us that AHS has actually cut home care funding, with hours for people who need home care being reduced and those referrals instead being pushed to client-directed home care. Those referrals, the client-directed home care, are being allegedly given preferential treatment and that when those referrals are made, the maximum amount is billed, but the hours don't match that. Now, to be clear, those are just multiple DMs from multiple separate sources that we have not confirmed. So do with that what you will, but it's certainly cause for concern because, as I spelled out, the folks who are involved in this healthcare model are inherently vulnerable, and making them the same ones to police the quality of care that they're getting is really quite questionable. And it's really quite problematic. And it's scary that this is the direction, especially with the aging population that the province of Alberta has. It's scary that this is the direction that the province is choosing to push things towards. Staying with healthcare, we got to talk about the noncologist convention for a second here. So the UCP is putting together a noncologist convention, that's what we're calling it, with a star cast, which is probably the best possible term to use, of veteran and former doctors, veterinarians. I mean, some of them are veteran doctors. Some of them just don't have their licenses anymore. Veterinarians and former doctors, those former doctors who lost their licenses, among others. So there's some other speakers there too. That noncologist convention, the UCP noncologist convention, and I'm calling it a UCP noncologist convention because it is an official UCP event being promoted with tickets sold on the UCP website. So this isn't just some fringe element. That's not what this is. This is an official UCP party event. You don't believe me? You can just go to their website. They got some condemnation. And again, not that it hasn't been getting condemnation for quite some time. But on June 11th, 2024, the Edmonton Zone Medical Staff Association released a letter, this letter containing 129 signatories, and which was endorsed by the board of Alberta Health Association and the Community Health Nurses of Canada Alberta branch, which also, in case you were wondering, no, you just can't reshare and go and sign because that's not how legitimate letters work. You can't do that. It's an open letter, so anyone can read it. But it's not a letter that anybody can just go and sign because they feel the same way, nor should be, because then the letter wouldn't have the weight of experts. There's a couple of sections of the letter that we wanted to make sure that we highlight because we like to let the experts do the talking as much as possible. From the letter, setting public health policy by recruiting discredited and unlicensed doctors and spokespersons who cater to an anti-science agenda is dangerous. The upcoming UCP-sponsored event, An Injection of Truth Town Hall, is an example of the fear-mongering by anti-vaccination proponents transmitting fringe opinions informed by hearsay and innuendo. And the letter didn't just say, hey, this is a thing that you're doing badly. It also had a request, and it's a fairly reasonable request. We asked that the Premier and the Minister of Health permit Alberta's public health leaders, CMOH at Alberta Health, SMOH at Alberta Health Services, to make publicly available the evidence on COVID-19 mRNA vaccine safety and the effectiveness in children, and address any concerns the public has raised, which isn't, that sounds entirely appropriate. People have concerns about the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. There's a lot of people who are spreading bad information, who are doing a lot of fear-mongering. Hey, provincial government, could you maybe release the actual data that shows what the actual impact of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines is? Could you do that? It doesn't sound ridiculous. To date, it hasn't been released yet, though. So, there's that. But Danielle Smith, she did. And we're going to do things a little bit differently. Normally, we like to put like all of our Danielle Smith clips together at the end of the episode so we can just have this great big Danielle Smith buffet table of shocking and dumb things that Danielle Smith has said in the last week or so. We're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to actually mix them in tonight. So, to make a long story short and to set the context for some of the clips that you're going to hear throughout the evening or watch, Danielle Smith sat down with none other than Ryan Jesperson. And listen, before we play the clip, everybody stop dumping on Jespo, okay? He's not the guy to ask the hard questions when he has these big league people on his shows. That's not what he does. And anybody expecting him to do that is just setting themselves up for failure. What he is really good at is booking people, asking them questions that everybody wants to have the follow-ups done on, and then moving on so that other folks can follow up. It's also worth noting that Jespo did have a couple of journalists on a little bit later, and they covered off some of the ground, not all of it. We're going to try to do some more of that tonight, but stop dumping on Jespo. The real talk is what real talk is. And he's got to be able to book his guests. He's got to be able to keep his sponsors and advertisers happy. So we're grateful that he continues to have people like Smith on for candid conversations where she feels a little bit relaxed and says things like this.
In a week from when we're talking, June 17th, people can find it on the party's website, unitedconservative.ca, presented in the riding of Calgary Lougheed, an injection of truth, it's called. A town hall working with what they're calling an all-star cast of doctors and scientists, which I'll personally take issue with. But they're basically wanting to see the kids, like they want to see the vaccine program for kids changed. And it's prompted, as I'm sure you've seen, an open letter from the Edmonton Zone medical staff. And I'll just read a quick bit from there. Part of this open letter, they say, setting public health policy by recruiting discredited and unlicensed doctors and spokespersons who cater to an anti-science agenda is dangerous. They say the UCP sponsored event is an example of fear-mongering by anti-vax proponents transmitting fringe opinions informed by hearsay and innuendo. They say providing rigorous analysis of evidence and safety and effectiveness of vaccines a better way to serve all Albertans and their children. Why are you allowing this to happen under the UCP banner? This seems like it's like a self-own. It's like you're shooting yourself in the foot kind of a thing.
Well, look, I mean, it's the local MLA and his constituency association is hosting the event. As you know, UCP policy is advisory to government. Government policy is very different. The process we go through in government is we hear from all voices, listen to all stakeholders, and we make the best decisions for the interests of Albertans. And the decisions we made as government is that these vaccines are available to anyone who wants them from the age of 6 months forward, and as are all of the other vaccines. And I think what we're seeing is that with the MMR vaccine and the DTaP vaccine, there's a very high uptake. I believe over 75%, which is very positive because those are very dangerous childhood illnesses. On the COVID vaccine, there's less. It's less than 10%. I see from the stats that we keep on immunization. So parents are looking at the various options for their kids, talking to the doctors, and making the best decision to protect the health of their children. That's what we're allowing. We're allowing parents to be the decision makers here, and we'll make all the vaccines available for those who want them.
Remember that press conference that Danny did where Dr. Paul Parks was asked a similar question about vaccines and his answer just knocked it out of the park? And then we get that word salad from Danielle Smith. Everybody's trying to hedge things a little bit. Danny says it's just the constituency association that's putting it on. It's not like it's an official. Oh wait, yes, it is an official UCP constituency association with an event that's officially being promoted with tickets sold on the UCP website. So you don't get to say as the leader of that party, no, it's nothing to do with the party, because it in every possible way is. There's the first piece. It's also worth noting that nowhere in her answer did Danielle Smith say, you know what? The COVID-19 vaccines are in fact safe. Any vaccine carries with it a very, very, very small risk, but when you compare COVID-19 vaccines to other vaccines, it's in the same ballpark. It's a safe vaccine. Follow the instructions of your family physician. Follow the instructions of public health. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. She didn't say that. She said, the vaccines are available. And then she said that she's allowing parents to make the choices for their kids, which is fascinating. And particularly when you take into consideration some of her other policies towards what health decisions parents are allowed to make for their kids and what ones they aren't. It's a little bit revealing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because we got a lot more to talk about. And one of the big news stories, and of course, I'm not going to lie, while that video was playing, I was just checking the Twitter feed to make sure there was no other surprises because last week we kicked up the show, and halfway through the show, it was announced, oh, by the way, story broke, Shannon Phillips was going to be resigning. Now, there's no debate that Shannon Phillips has had a long career in politics. She's done very well. There's also no debate that Shannon Phillips was inappropriately surveilled, or we could just call it being stalked, by 2 Lethbridge police officers in 2017, and that the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team investigated that situation and said that there was enough evidence to pursue charges, and then Alberta prosecutors decided not to. There was no reason, to be clear, when the police were surveilling Shannon Phillips, there was no legal reason for them to be doing so. There was no relevant investigation. This was 2 cops who decided that they didn't like her, and they felt that it was completely appropriate to abuse their powers, to abuse the resources that they had by nature of being police officers in order to stalk and intimidate an elected official. That is some dystopian shit right there. And it's pretty wild that ACERT came forward and said, yeah, no, this is not good. There's enough here that probably there should be some charges. And the Crown prosecutors said, or we could not. Let's not. Not only does that send a shocking message to police, not the good cops, the bad cops, that maybe you can use your authority for a little bit of intimidation. Maybe you can use your authority to check people out inappropriately. Not only does it send that shocking message, but it also sends a very chilling message for anybody who's looking at getting into politics. But the story broke on Sunday night. The next day, Shannon Phillips held a press conference. And she read a statement, and then she answered some questions. The whole press conference is about a half hour long. We're not going to play the whole press conference because we'd probably get in trouble. But there was a section of video of the press conference that we are going to play. It is 3 minutes long. So, get your popcorn. But it is critically important for anyone to hear because one of the questions that Shannon Phillips was asked had to do with the state of politics in the province of Alberta. And she really, really didn't pull any punches.
Increasing polarization, disinformation, and the ongoing sort of worsening vituperation of public life as certainly motivating some of my decision making. Given that for me it existed outside of any exercise of citizenship, any exercise of it was completely outside the bounds of the rule of law. Given that, I can take being criticized on a political level. I can even, take the trolls and the bots and, whatever the Kremlin throws at us. But what I can't take is what happened from the LPS, given as it is so far outside the acceptable norms of the rule of law and the institutions of liberal democracy, for which they have never been held accountable and never shown a whiff of responsibility. There is no question that that is part of it. There is no question that many of these dynamics are worsening. There is also no question that I am well placed to be able to speak about them. The coarsening of political discourse and public life is very problematic. It is problematic for being able to attract good candidates, people who actually want to serve, who want to take on this difficult work. People in my line of work, I think, don't know how to deal with it yet. Our party structures don't know how to deal with it. Our legislative assemblies don't know how to deal with it to keep us safe. Our legal environment doesn't know how to deal with it. The far right has absolutely organized themselves to take over the information environment, to find ways to amplify their voices far beyond what they have earned or their actual size in political life. But in response, progressive and social democratic parties and others have not figured out how to counter it. And people of good faith and good intention, decent people, haven't figured out how to keep public life a place that is worth working. Those are large questions. They involve the institutions of our legislatures, our legal environment, our party structures, and how we respond to these threats to liberal democracy. They are everywhere. And I want to be very clear on who's responsible here. The far right is responsible for whipping up disinformation and anger and hate. We're not going to solve it all today, but there is absolutely a through line here. You're right. And it did have an effect on my decision making. And it is important to recognize it. Sweeping it under the rug or other responses do not work, and it leads down a dark path.
Now, Shannon Phillips pretty much crushed it there. And I don't think there's anybody who could be making the argument that she didn't. The reality is, and we talked about this at the beginning of the show, we've talked about it many times on the show before, the reality is there's a lot that's gone wrong with our body politic in the last bunch of years. Now, one of the things that a lot of people agree has contributed to that is there's been this emboldening. And at the same time as there's been this emboldening, there's also been a little bit of a withdrawing. So one of the things that's happened is there are a lot of people who have stepped forward with gross, bigoted, hateful views. And they've been given microphones. They've been given microphones by the media culture on the right, whether we're talking about organizations like the Western Standard, who has published multiple inflammatory articles attacking the LGBTQ2S plus community. They've published multiple inflammatory editorials attacking the LGBTQ2S plus community. Or whether it's coming from politicians who do that sort of thing. And there's a lot of people who like to say, hey, you know what? Donald Trump, south of the border, it doesn't come up here. If you actually believe that's true, then you very clearly weren't paying attention to any of the freedom convoys or freedom protests, because you couldn't spit 20 feet without hitting a Trump flag. And if you walked past or watched any of the coverage of any of those freedom convoy movements or encampments or protests or walks or any of those things, if you're paying attention, you'd also see there's a very clear separatist component that's going on there. And some of the biggest figures in the right's political bubble are openly separatist. David Parker has said multiple times that he personally would like to see Alberta separate. There's lots of other people who have said the same thing, who are all part of that Take Back Alberta little sphere. So if you don't think that American politics has a direct influence on Canadian politics, in particular Alberta politics, you're fooling yourself. If you don't think the tactics that are being used in the United States by the right and the far right are working their way into Alberta and Canada's political discourse, you're fooling yourself. That's just the reality. And Shannon Phillips is exactly right. There's a strong problem with the fact that there's not enough condemnation of bigoted views. I can call someone's view bigoted without saying that they're a bad person. And this is where the left, or progressives, have fallen down consistently. Rather than address the ideas, the left finds it way easier all too often to initiate personal attacks. And because personal attacks have become affiliated with many in the brand of the left, even though it doesn't happen that much very more, A lot of progressives take the view of, I don't want to get into a fight over it. I just don't want to get a step back. I've said it many times on the show before. The right has evangelizing built into their DNA in many ways. The left sucks at it. And Shannon Phillips, in that 3 minutes, did a spectacular job of laying that all out. If only there were political leaders, people who were still in, I don't know, maybe the highest office in the province, who could also say, no, you know what? We take a look at what happened in Coots. We take a look at the fact that allegedly there were RCMP officers who were going to be targeted for murder by some of those protesters. If we take a look at the fact that there's regular vandalism towards LGBTQ2S plus symbols. If we take a look at the fact that hate crimes for a good chunk of time were skyrocketing in the capital of the province. There's no shortage of examples to find ways that the political discourse in this province has gotten way too polarized. And that there's a lot of hateful views that need to be called out. If only there was somebody who could speak to that on some sort of talk show.
Concerned about the state of Alberta politics? Do you share her concern? Police service, if they don't, they can look back in our archives a couple of weeks ago. MLA Phillips talked to us about this. Are you concerned about the state of Alberta politics? Do you share her concerns there? And are you concerned that the Alberta's Crown prosecutors are not proceeding with charges like ACERT recommended in that police surveillance scenario?
Look, I think every politician has an expectation that they're not going to be surveilled by police. I was just as alarmed by the allegations and findings against Shannon Phillips as I was against Kerry Diot. So this is not a partisan issue. We've had instances where this has occurred in the past. Now, as you know, this is in the hands of my Justice Minister and Attorney General. So I don't comment on the decision for why the Crown made that choice. But I think that the message has been sent, and I would hope that we don't see these kinds of cases going forward, because it's clearly had a major impact on Shannon Phillips, and we want people again to feel comfortable putting their name forward in politics. When it comes to the issue, I guess I think Alberta is a very welcoming and robust place for ideas. I haven't seen the same kind of extremes that we see in other jurisdictions. When we have protests, they tend to be peaceful. We don't tend to see people trashing buildings or setting things on fire, and I think that's a good thing. I think on both sides, the fact that we're able to have a sharing of ideas without causing damage or harm or creating fear, I just think it's a little bit different. I've seen just as many concerns about the Black Bloc aligning with left-wing causes, causing absolute chaos in other jurisdictions. That's not happening here. And I think we should be mindful of what's happening around the world. But I would bring the temperature down a little bit. I think that we actually have a very respectful way of debating issues with each other, either through the legislature or in the public. I know that that's the tone that I try to take. I approach every person with, I might learn something from them. I talk to every person, even those that I disagree with on most things, to try to find some area of common ground. So I can only control how I conduct myself and how our caucus conducts ourselves. But I haven't seen the same kind of concerns that she does. So I'm sorry she feels that way.
Your education minister, Mr. Nicolaitis.
She's sorry she feels that way. It's remarkable that Danielle Smith can take all of that reality and just go, nah. And it's frustrating because, again, clearly somebody has been using buzzwords around her that she doesn't fully understand. Organizations like the Black Bloc. That's like saying organizations like Antifa, as if there's some sort of club, as if there's some sort of membership that people sign up for. Antifa is just an abbreviation for people who are anti-fascist. Now, there's some people who are anti-fascist who use tactics that are gross. Some of those tactics in large crowd situations are referred to as black bloc tactics, but it's not a group. It's not a club. It's not a political organization. That's not what the black bloc is. So again, somebody's very clearly used some words around her that she thinks that she can just apply universally. But again, it's spreading misinformation and disinformation, and it's doing a disservice. So maybe as I'm saying all of this, it shouldn't come as a big shock that Danielle Smith is like, I'm sorry Shannon Phillips feels that way. Do we need to go back to what we opened the show with? The David Staples thing? And the fact that Danielle Smith has used David Staples over and over and over again. Do we need to talk about True North again? Do we need to talk about Western Standard again? There is absolutely an ecosystem that exists that reinforces these bigoted views that crank up the fear. And anybody who dares to speak against it gets minimized or shut down as quickly as possible. Ironically enough, not just from the right, but also from the left. And it's unfortunate because it leads to situations where the Premier of Alberta can say things like that in regards to a political environment where we literally have, in the last couple of years, had people who were breaking provincial and federal laws because they believed that, in effect, an act of, they're being charged with mischief, but in effect, an act of insurrection could influence government policies. And the tragedy is that in many people's eyes, it did. And one of those people's eyes is the current Premier of Alberta. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the Redford appointment. Alison Redford, as many people know, was appointed to invest Alberta. We talked about it last week a little bit. There's been a couple of new Smithian developments that we want to, talk about real quick. First of all, Invest Alberta is not the greatest place potentially to be appointed to. We went over some of the Glassdoor reviews from former employees, and they weren't very kind. One of them described went under the header sinking ship. So that's not super great. The only pro they listed for working for Invest Alberta was, I receive income to pay my bills. That's a current employee. The other one, the one that really swung for the fences that we wanted to highlight again, the cons, the CEO is a narcissist who enjoys bullying staff, putting people down and taking credit for their work. He weaponizes people in the organization to turn them against each other or to get them to do his bidding for him. It goes on and on and on. If you want the full details, you can go back to last week's show. But it makes it pretty clear Invest Alberta is a pretty challenging place to be. It's also worth noting, as we talked about last week, the CEO who got that rave review of being a narcissist who enjoys bullying staff doesn't even live in Alberta. So Invest Alberta, the organization that's designed to attract people to want to invest their money in Alberta, to come to Alberta, can't even get their own CEO to live here. So, interesting appointment. But Danielle Smith was asked on Jespo about the Redford appointment, and her answer was fascinating.
Appointed to the board of Invest Alberta. What was your conversation like with the former premier ahead of this appointment?
Well, I can tell you, people know that we're not personal friends. We were probably some of the fiercest critics of each other when we were both in politics together. And one of the things that struck me when we did have our meeting is the work that she's done around the world. She hasn't been able to work in Alberta, which I think is a real shame for somebody who served our province in the capacity as premier. So she's gone around the world and assisted countries in helping to establish oil and gas regulators, most notably in Guyana, which I've been told is going to be one of the future superpowers for oil production. And so I thought that was an interesting world experience to have. And Invest Alberta is an agency that reaches out into the world to try to bring investment here. So it seemed to me like that was the best use of her expertise. And I think she just wants to be able to work in Alberta again. And after 10 years, I believe in second chances. And I think that she deserves a second chance.
She told you that she couldn't find work in Alberta?
I think that's unfortunate. I mean, most premiers, if you look at any of the other premiers, Ed Stelmach, he's the chair of the board of Covenant Health. You look at Dave Hancock, he's a judge. If you look at Jason Kenney, he's on multiple boards, including various academic boards as well as law firms. I'm sure that Ms. Notley is going to have a number of opportunities, and quite frankly, that just didn't happen for Alison Redford, and I do think that's a shame. So I think we want to attract good people into politics. The reward for being in politics shouldn't be you're never able to work in your province again, and you remain ostracized and a social pariah for life. If that's how we treat people, we're not going to have good people run for office.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that clip. If you can listen to that clip and not think, I wonder if Danny's projecting a little bit. Wow, impressive. Because there was to more than a couple of our ears, that clip made us go, wow, she's projecting a lot there. Like, oh, it's so unfair when you can't find real work in the province of Alberta just because you did some really, really horrible things. That's fascinating. But there's a specific little moment of that clip that piqued our attention. And that's when Jespo said, she told you she couldn't find work in the province. And couldn't pass up the opportunity for an impression there. She told you she couldn't find work in the province. And she said, yeah, I think that's really unfortunate. And if you watch that clip closely, you can see the gears turning. There's that little like, oh shit moment where she couldn't say, yes, Redford said that. And there's probably a really good reason why Redford didn't say that to her, we presume, because it's patently not true. As soon as we heard that clip, we immediately looked up Alison Redford. We looked up her work history, and as many people do, for reasons that escape me personally, she's got a fairly active LinkedIn. And it turns out it's not that she hasn't been able to find work in Alberta. She's been able to find tons of work in Alberta. She, since 2017 to the present, has been a freelance fellowship with the Latin American Research Center at the University of Calgary. She has been on the board of directors for two, both of which are to present, oil companies both of those oil companies are based out of the province of Alberta. And since September of 2023 to the present, she's been a visiting research fellow with the University of Calgary. And on her own LinkedIn, she posted about how excited she was to be helping to teach law. So there's no question that Alison Redford has not had difficulties finding work in the province of Alberta. That's not who it appears that Danny was talking about in that clip. So one can't help but wonder, who was Premier Smith talking about in the clip where you become a social pariah? But there's also another level that needs to be unpacked with the whole logic that Danny tried to advance in that clip. Look, we've got this person who they're so great, and they've done all of this great work, so good. I haven't had any problems with them since we were in office together. Let's turn the clock backs all the way to 2022.
To be the leader of the official opposition. And I took that role very seriously. I was a very strong opposition leader when Ed Stelmach was premier, pointing out the things in the direction I think he was going wrong, particularly on the new royalty framework. And in the end, it turned out that we were quite correct, because when Alison Redford got in, she very quickly changed the new royalty framework. So we had some successes there. But then, of course, Alison Redford had all kinds of issues of questionable decision-making around the use of taxpayer dollars. And we had to raise those issues. And then ultimately, she was replaced by her caucus as well. So when Jim came back, I think you expected me to do the same thing, that I was supposed to hold him to account as official opposition leader, and that I was supposed to make him prove to us that he was going to be different, because ultimately he wasn't able to prove to us that he was different. The coalition blew apart, and it took Brian Jean and Jason Kenney to try to heal the movement and bring it back together again.
2 whole years ago, almost to the day, Danny was still going on about the bad decisions that Alison Redford had made. And again, there's still another level to be unpacked here, because Danny's argument appears to be Alison Redford made a bunch of really bad decisions. She had some ethical failings and perhaps some moral failings while she was in office. And she's got all of these great qualifications, but nobody will hire her. Therefore, because she can't find a job in the private sector, according to Danny, not Miss Redford's LinkedIn, because she can't find a job in the private sector, we feel like it's the job of government to give her an appointment on a board that notoriously has issues, to right the ship. If only an incompetence, which is Danny's argument, to be clear. I'm not saying that it's the truth, but Danielle Smith's argument is very clearly, well, she can't get a job anywhere else, so we just had to. Which is wild, and explains a lot of the other appointments that we've seen and a lot of the other sole source contracts that we've seen, because in Danielle Smith's world, everybody deserves a second chance, no matter what they did wrong. And it's not just that they deserve a second chance. They deserve a second chance on the taxpayer's dime, which is absolutely wild. Moving on from there. And the reason why I'm wearing the Punchy Communications Given Her t-shirt tonight, there's been some developments with the War Room. And again, this is another one where the reporting on it wasn't great. I'm not gonna lie. From any of the sides, the reporting was not super fantastic, because there has been some misrepresentation as to what's happening with the War Room, their purpose, their resources, all of those things. By the War Room, I'm talking about the Canadian Energy Centre. And there's no reasonable argument to be made that the Canadian Energy Centre, with its stealing logos not once, not twice, the use of a PR company that had very questionable background and fake dogs on their website, the attackings of the Bigfoots, the lack of transparency. There's no question that the War Room was an unmitigated failure that cost Albertans a boatload of money. That's one of the reasons why Jason Kenney cut their budget back from the original $30 million a year to considerably less during his tenure. So the War Room was a dumpster fire. Nobody's not saying that. But saying that the War Room has been destroyed or the War Room has been shut down is somewhat misleading. We're going to talk about that in a sec, but before we do, we got to talk about why was the War Room shut down. And it appears, by all reasonable measure, that the War Room was shut down in no small part because of the incoming legislation that was championed by NDP MP Charlie Angus to say, hey, we don't let tobacco companies lie about the health benefits of smoking in their advertising. We shouldn't do that with oil companies either. Oil companies shouldn't be allowed to lie about the benefits of the things that they're doing. So if an oil company wants to say, hey, you know what, we've got just the best oil and gas, it cures cancer, it raises fertility, and you can grow food in it, they shouldn't be allowed to do that because those are all lies. So you shouldn't let them do that. It's not unreasonable. It wouldn't be the first time that the government has said, hey, you can't lie when you're advertising. And this bill says, hey, if oil and gas companies are making false claims about what they're doing to mitigate the impacts of their products, then yeah, they can be held accountable for that. Absolutely. And anybody who lies about the positive benefits, which is not to say that there aren't positive benefits. I drove to work 2 days ago. I intend to drive to work tomorrow. I will be doing so in a vehicle that uses all kinds of petrochemical products. But I'm not going to say that I'll be leaving a trail of flowers behind me from my exhaust pipe because I have no illusions about that. If somebody was to claim that was the case, they would be lying. So the argument that has been put forward for the reason that the war room was shut down is, let's let the Premier of Alberta explain it herself.
It's necessary because when we have a really big battle that we have to fight, I'm the one fighting it. I'm the one leading it. That's what we saw with our net zero campaign to make the world and Ottawa in particular understand just how devastating it would be for us to try to reach a net zero target by 2035. And it looks like it's had some impact. At least the Canadian Electricity Advisory Committee agrees with us. So when we have those big initiatives that we have to do, it should be led out of the Premier's office. So that was the thinking behind it. There's some great work that's been done by the Canadian Energy Centre from a research point of view, identifying important studies that need to have more profile, making sure that we get our positive message out about the level of production that we're doing, our emissions story. And so there's 3 staff that have moved over into intergovernmental affairs to be able to continue that work. We want to be able to maintain that presence. But I think having the moniker War Room is not what they should be doing. They really should be giving good, credible research and data on the state of our industry, the state of our emissions reduction, and they should leave the fighting to me. And I'm quite happy to keep that fight going, especially now that the federal government with Bill C-59 is trying to make it illegal for us to celebrate and talk about our industry. I don't even know if the Canadian Energy Centre would be allowed to talk about some of these things, but fortunately the Alberta government has an exemption. So I'm going to use that exemption, and I'm going to be making sure that at every opportunity I celebrate the things that are going well in our industry.
It's the last 10 seconds that really sell it because it makes it very, very clear. There was some concern that maybe the War Room's message wasn't entirely factual because, again, the only people who'd be getting into trouble for saying things would be people who were, what's the word I'm looking for, lying. So there were some concerns that Danielle Smith appears to have, her words, not mine, that the War Room might have become a target of the bill that says you can't lie about oil and gas anymore. And so because the provincial government has an exemption where they can lie, I guess, about the benefits of oil and gas, she's not getting rid of the War Room or the Canadian Energy Centre. She's bringing it in-house. She's integrating it into the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Of the official statement, after careful consideration, we will be integrating the mandate of the CEC, the Canadian Energy Centre, into intergovernmental relations. Resources such as CEC assets, intellectual property, and research will now be supporting intergovernmental relations in order to seamlessly continue this important work. Seamlessly continue this important work. So, the War Room hasn't been shut down. It's just been relocated to where they can, I guess, lie and not have to face criminal charges for it, which is fascinating. But there's one other little sort of question that we had about this whole War Room situation before it moves on. Because in a completely shocking turn of events, one of the heavy contributors to the War Room has some history with Danielle Smith. I'm talking, of course, of the recipient of some pretty good sole source contract money from the Smith government, Dave Yeager. Dave Yeager, who also chaired the Smith's Advice to the Premier on Alberta's Energy Future sole-sourced panel, and then another panel after that. Dave Yeager, who takes credit for introducing Smith to being the leader of the Wild Rose. Dave Yeager, who says that he recruited Danielle Smith to be the leader of the Wild Rose. Dave Yeager, who's been a huge supporter of Smith throughout all of her things. Dave Yeager, who has also written multiple articles for the Canadian Energy Centre. And again, Dave Yeager, who got that sweet advisory council on Alberta's energy future for $60,000. Wonder who's going to be running the war room after all of this. There's just so many questions. Tom Olson has already said that he's going to be staying on for a transition period of a very short time before he gets his pretty generous severance package and fades off into the sunset. So somebody's going to need to be in charge. Gosh, I wonder who that could possibly be, who maybe needs a second chance of some kind. I don't know. Moving on from there. And this is pretty wild. We got to talk about the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Now, I'm no expert on the Heritage Savings Trust Fund by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know what? I'm going to let somebody who maybe has a little bit more familiarity with the inner workings of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund and the importance, the one last chance, importance that it holds for Alberta's future. Do the talking.
Peter Lougheed had the foresight to create what is today commonly called the Alberta Heritage Fund. The initial purpose of this fund was to invest a portion of Alberta's non-renewable resource revenues each year, so the investment income earned on the fund would eventually grow large enough to eliminate our province's reliance on resource revenues when they ultimately declined. Turns out that vision was well ahead of its time. In fact, several countries, such as Norway and many other oil and gas producing nations around the world, adopted that same strategy, and now boast sovereign wealth funds large enough to entirely eliminate their nation's reliance on resource revenues. In fact, these nations now earn enough each year in their funds to make massive investments in world-class infrastructure and other public benefits that were not previously possible. In Alberta, if we had just reinvested the income earned in our Heritage Fund from the Lougheed government's initial deposits of about $12 billion in the late 70s and early 80s, even without investing another extra dollar, our Heritage Fund would be worth over $250 billion today, earning between $12 and $25 billion per year in revenue. This means we would have been earning enough interest today to make us entirely unreliant on resource revenues. But for a variety of reasons from both within and without Alberta, we did not do this as a province. Of course, now's not the time for us to bemoan what might have been. In my view, the time has come to act decisively and end any further procrastination. Last year, our government passed a law mandating that all income earned in the Alberta Heritage Fund must be invested in the fund rather than spent. In my view, our province has one last shot at getting this right.
One last shot to get it right. She said it. You heard it. Basically, the idea is years ago, the province put in a boatload of money. And if we just kept reinvesting the interest that we get year over year, we'd be so far ahead. We wouldn't need this resource revenue. We could just let oil and gas companies keep all their profits. It would be delightful. That's what we should do. And Danielle Smith was so committed to this idea that the Alberta government in the last provincial budget put $2 billion into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. They had to also borrow $2.4 billion to meet the budgetary requirements of the budget. So we borrowed, in effect, $2.4 billion to put $2 billion in. I hope we get a really good return on investment rate, interest rate on the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, because there's 2.4 billion versus less than 2 billion. That's $400 million over the investment that we had to borrow. So I don't know what the ROI is on that, but Daniel Smith was very clear. This is our last shot. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance. So, sorry, people in the chat were making Stan comments earlier, so I thought I'd bring it all home. But Daniel Smith, very, very clear. In order to make sure that Albertans' future is able to survive the energy transition, we have to invest all of the money that we make off of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund back into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, until this week, where she had another proposition for Albertans.
Ways that that we might be able to rejuvenate our approach on our Heritage Savings Trust Fund. We've already talked about this. We've changed the rules so that we invest the income in the fund rather than siphoning it off for operations. And just in looking at the kind of approach that Quebec has taken with their investments, they do have a portion of their fund that goes to assist in helping local businesses. Now, you can't do that with pension funds. That would be irresponsible, because you have to invest pension funds for the benefit of the pensioners, and it's a little bit more of a conservative investment strategy. But if we took a different investment strategy with those Heritage Savings Trust Fund assets, more like a sovereign wealth fund, that might give us more opportunities to be able to assist in de-risking projects that we're finding difficult to be able to get financing. So we are beginning that process of consulting. Minister Horner will unroll that strategy in a little bit more detail in the fall, but we'd be very interested in seeing if there's some innovative ways that we can be looking at how to support the business community in a different way.
So much to unpack there. So first of all, if you need to de-risk an investment opportunity, what that means is everybody who is an expert in that area has taken a look at that investment opportunity and said, that's too risky for me. I don't want to lose my money on that. And so what Daniel Smith is proposing is to use money from the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to indemnify investors against additional loss, so they go in on risky projects that have no business case. The people who are responsible for generating profit for their shareholders have already looked at these projects and said, these will not generate profits for our shareholders. And here's Smith saying, okay, I hear you, but listen to me for a sec. Okay, so I hear you don't like the risk that you'd lose too much money on this. You wouldn't be able to make some profits. What if we just went ahead and used taxpayers' money to make sure that you didn't lose your money? What if we just we lost the taxpayers' money? How would that be? How would that sit with you? That's what she's saying. And not only is she saying, hey, you know what? We'll use taxpayers' money to guarantee that you won't get stung. She's saying this Heritage Savings Trust Fund, for which we only get one more kick at the can with, to make sure that there's a bright future for Alberta post-energy transition. Let's use that money for that. Let's use the money for Alberta's future on the high-risk projects that are too high risk for business to touch, not to get better money for Albertans, but to protect the business people. There's the first piece. And it's wild that the argument that she would make is, well, we can't get the pension. That would be irresponsible. You can't mess with people's future. We don't want to mess with the pension money that we're saving for people's future. So instead, we'll mess with the Heritage Savings Trust Fund that we're saving for people's future. The one silver lining of that whole little bit that Danielle Smith did there was when she said, you can't take You can't take people's pension monies and use it for high-risk investments or investments that are going to be benefiting the province. You just can't do that. So for all the folks who are running around saying, hey, you know what would be great about an Alberta pension? We could take that money and we could invest it back into Alberta and we could use it to build Alberta projects. The premier of the province just said, no, you can't. So I guess you could take that plus for a pension off the table. Moving on from there, our last little segment before we get into the open mic. If there's anybody who shows up who wants to be part of the open mic tonight, the last little segment, we got to talk about insurance, because yet another insurance provider announced this week that they were going to be stepping back from Alberta as a province. Sonnet Insurance sent out an email to all of their clients. Sonnet is a lower cost insurance company. They keep their costs lower. We got tons of DMs from people when these emails started going out. And thank you to everybody, by the way, who sends us DMs with all this stuff. But the reasons why Sonnet stepped back might not be exactly what you expect, because what Sonnet said was that due to the current operating environment for insurance companies in Alberta, we've made the difficult decision to phase out Sonnet's auto insurance operations in the province. We've submitted our intent to withdraw to the provincial regulator. So what are those operating conditions exactly? Well, it turns out that the way that Alberta does insurance is bad on a number of levels. So the fact that if you want to go after somebody for costs, the fact that that exists as a thing means that legal fees are tremendous. How tremendous? Well, according to data from the General Insurance Statistical Agency, Alberta's auto insurance system is facing some of its highest cost pressures in Canada. This report said that legal fees account for a greater percentage of the auto insurance premiums that drivers pay in the province than anywhere else in the country. So, legal fees are a big chunk of why Albertans' insurance is so high. GISA data indicates that the costs from litigation and legal fees are twice as high as Ontario and over 3 times higher than some Atlantic provinces. So the fact that the process for getting insurance settlements is so heavy with legal stuffs is one of the biggest reasons why insurance is so expensive. One of the other reasons, the same report generated a list of things that could be done. It said it needed urgent action to reform the auto insurance system. It needed to fix the grid. Apparently, it's not just the electrical grid that we have problems with. There's a grid framework that is bad public policy and charges safe drivers more to subsidize the premiums of high-risk drivers with a history of at-fault claims and infractions. The grid works against the very thing the government seeks to encourage, safe driving. It's time that subsidy is removed. And acts the insurance premium tax and provincial health levy. So many people don't know this, but the government charges a hidden 4% premium tax on every auto insurance policy. The provincial government. Removing this tax would save drivers approximately $65 per policy. In addition, the province charges a health levy on auto insurance, adding another $30 per policy. Just the measures that we talked about there. IBC said the measures could save drivers $325 per year. So there's lots that could be done to change the insurance system, because it's important to notice it's the high legal fees that appear to have driven Sonnet out of the market. And again, Sonnet was a lower cost insurance provider. So the fact that they weren't able to make ends meet because there's too many bad drivers in Alberta who cost the good drivers too much money, and there's nothing to balance that, makes it an unsafe business environment. I mean, it's obviously unsafe on the roads too, but an unsafe business environment. So let's go back to what Danielle said about provincial insurance, which would save Albertans not $325, but thousands.
Absolutely, unconditionally ruled out the government auto insurance or public auto insurance option for Alberta.
I can tell.
And if so, why? And if not, why? And
Well,
that's my first question.
I can tell you that the sticker shock of bringing through a fully publicly funded auto insurance program in Alberta made all the ministers' eyes pop. It's something like $3 billion that we would need to set it up and capitalize it. And in addition to that, I think we would lose somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in the private sector, which is not something we're inclined to do. We like the ability to have a free enterprise market with a lot of players, but we're still trying to navigate how we get to that. How do we deal with the issue of escalating cost of repairs? How do we deal with the escalating cost of litigation? How do we make sure that when there are profits, they get shared back to the policy payers? So we've done some new guidelines around that. There's more that we need to do, but we just launched a major consultation 2 weeks ago to try to get that feedback. But I would say that the appetite for a full Alberta-run public insurance system is very low. I wouldn't anticipate that would very likely be the result that would emerge from this consultation.
So, no provincial insurance for the province of Alberta. There's no appetite for it. It would cost too much money. I'm sorry. It's just hearing Danielle Smith say, it would cost too much money. We have to be responsible. Just before she then, at a different event, said, we're totally going to read the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to de-risk investments in the economy for companies that have said that the investment opportunities aren't worth it. But for insurance, for things that would actually improve Albertans' lives, for things that would actually address some of the issues, for things that would actually address the affordability crisis, those are a bridge too far. Alberta Pension Plan, we'll totally pursue that. Never mind the fact that it could cost billions and billions of dollars. Alberta Police Force, we'll totally pursue that. We're going to call it we're going to rebrand the sheriffs, kind of like we rebanded the war room. At significant cost. But things that could actually make insurance more fair and more affordable for Albertans, nah, we can't do that. It's absolutely wild that she would make those claims. And hopefully we're going to be having a conversation with a couple of insurance experts over the next little bit, so it's not just me pontificating, because that's one of the things that we, obviously I pontificate a lot, but one of the things that we try to do is bring in expert voices, and we are going to be having some expert voices joining us over the next little bit. Not tonight, but they're coming. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But we got one more thing that we gotta talk about here, because if you live in Calgary, things aren't great right now. Things are a little rough. We had this problem with the pipes. Please send Mario, because we have some big pipes that need some big fixing. It turns out one of the largest feeder mains that provides water to 1.4 million Calgarians was made with materials that were overpromised and underdelivered. So the type of concrete pipe that was used back in the 70s to make this giant water main, that type of pipe was expected. It was promised by the people who manufactured it, just as good as steel pipes, they said. Last 100 years, they said. It turns out they last about 50. And so the water main break, they saw Calgary's water supply more than decimated when they got it all dug up, which took some time, to be clear. Takes a little while to move that much ground in order to get at the pipe. Then when they started taking a look, which was the responsible thing to do, to be clear, they realized, hey, we've got more than this one little hole here. We've got a bunch of other areas that are starting to fail. We need to deal with that too. And there's still a boatload of pipe that hasn't been investigated yet. So the city has said, hopefully 3 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. We really hope we get this fixed. We'll see what happens. Here's the bottom line, folks. There's no question that the communications from the city has been an unmitigated train wreck. It's been so very bad. And there are lots of people who have communications experience, professionals, and all of those folks who have said, the comms have been so bad. And there's lots of people who have put on their tinfoil hats as much as they possibly can to say, you see, like, I feel like one of the things that should just be disqualifying for engaging in the political discourse at this point, if your first couple of sentences lead to the UN or the WEF, you're done. You don't get to participate. The grown-ups are talking. That's just it. That's my feelings. But the number of people who have generated ridiculous conspiracy theories about this thing is just ridiculous. Here's the bottom line. We don't know how big the problem is. We won't know how big the problem is for a while. We have a city that doesn't seem to be able to communicate its way out of a wet paper bag. That sucks. All of those things suck. Those are three things that neither you nor I are going to be able to do anything about. There's only one thing that we can do. And that is, quite simply, try to use less water. Because the reality is that if you decide to be selfish, if you decide to be stupid right now, you're going to end up hurting, potentially, a lot of other people. Now, I personally think that it's absolutely appalling that the city has not just pulled the plug on the Stampede because it uses a trainload of water. And it sends the wrong message. It absolutely. I know that everybody loves, but it's a cultural institution and it's the greatest outdoor show on earth. And we're talking about the water supply. When the Global Energy Show was in town, were some of the days that we saw some of the bigger peaks in water usage. By some estimates, there are 1.2 million people that come through the city of Calgary during the Stampede. We are barely able to manage the water supply realities right now with the city population being what it is. To try to say, well, we don't want to pull the pin on the Stampede yet because it's just so important that a bunch of people get really, really drunk and we have this really, really, really big party, to say nothing of the animal side of things, is just so divorced from reality. I fail to find the words to appropriately express my horror and contempt. It's absolutely wild. This shouldn't even be a conversation. This should have been the first pin to be pulled. Not only because the closer that you run it up to Stampede, the more all of the vendors are going to be affected. The more all of the performers are going to be affected. The more all of the animals are going to be affected. Like, the closer that you wait to pull the pin in this, the worse it's going to be for everybody. And the reality is, right now, and presumably for the next 3 to 5 weeks, the city of Calgary is not a city that can handle reliably getting water to all of its residents. The city of Calgary has no business making sure the Stampede still goes on. This is basic needs type stuff. It's absolutely wild. And it's unfair to try to pin all of this on the mayor or the current city council. I mean, for sure, the communication stuff, you can pin that on the mayor and the current city council because, good God. But the situation, you can't blame on any of the people who are currently on council, because those pipes were bought in the 70s under the impression that they were going to last for 100 years. They didn't. That sucks. But here we are. So again, before we open things up to the open mic and before I do the plugs for all of the things, the reality is, if you live in the city of Calgary, you just got to get a little bit creative. You just got to use use some rainwater, man. Like I set up a couple of rain barrels last night and they're all full. So I get to continue watering my garden till once it stops raining because I set up rain barrels. It's easy. Literally just garbage can out on the yard underneath the spout. Simple. So that's it. There's my public service announcement. Don't be a dick. Use less water where you can. Where you can't, you can't. But this isn't just about you. It's about the entire city. And if you're in a position where you can go run out and buy 16 flats of water, like everybody should keep a flat of water. You should always have emergency supplies. That goes without saying. But if you're running out and buying 16, 24 flats of water just so that you can sit on them and then you're watering your lawn, you're screwing out all of the people who can't afford to do those things. So there we go. And I want to point out as well, there are outline from the chat before I did the plugs and then we opened the mic. I just want to point out real quick, there's some outlying areas of Calgary get water from Calgary. So there's a lot of smaller communities around the Calgary area that also rely on Calgary for water. So there you go. That's the spiel. Before we go to the open mic, I want to do the obligatory plugs stuffs because they're so important. The first one is our Patreon page is always open. And we're going to have a couple of interviews. We're recording like 3 interviews this week that we're going to be putting up as quickly as we possibly can for Patreon sponsors that will go live over the coming weeks for everybody else. The singular perk that you get by signing it, well, there's 2. One of them, you get the warm feeling of knowing that you're helping us continue to produce the kind of content that we do, but you also get early access to all of our interview content. So you can do that by signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Now, that being said, a couple other things to note real quick. If there's a couple of people who said they don't like the Patreon, okay. That's fine. If you're not a believer in the Patreon, then you can also, and we're using all of the money that we get from the e-transfers to improve our tech gear. We have a camera and a microphone system that we want to get so that we can actually go out into the real world and talk to real people in person. That's going to cost us about $1,200. And if you're not a Patreon person, or if you just want to help us get towards that goal, then you can send us an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca, and all of the money will go there. And as I mentioned last week, the Breakdown is now officially a thing. It's the Breakdown Media is now a company. We have not applied for any subsidies or anything like that because we're not journalists, and that would just feel gross. We're a podcast and a web series that does commentary and satire, but we're not journalists, and so we're not going to take money away from journalists because that would be a dick move. But we do want to get some nice toys, so if you want to help us do that, you can send that e-transfer. I think that's about it. I think those are my plugs. Oh, abpoly.ca. We also have the clothing and the gears. We're looking at doing a refresh of the merch, the swag, if you will, in the coming months. So there's that too. And that's all of the plugs that I have. We do have a speaker who's in the queue. So we're going to bring in Chris as a speaker here. Hey, Chris, what's going on? You got to unmute yourself.
Duh. Sorry, my bad.
That's all good.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How you doing, man?
Oh, I can't complain. It's been a good weekend. I just have 2 quick points I want to make based off of today's show.
Okay.
The first was Rick Bell published an article on the whole auto insurance situation. And I don't know if you read the article or if you heard about it, but it was just, he said the funniest thing. I just want to mention it just because I thought about the clip he played with Danielle Smith and Bell. I don't have the quote in front of me, so I'm just going to ad-lib it. But he basically says something to the like of, oh, you don't want to piss off Rick Bell. It was like really funny. It was like he's saying this very like odd statement, kind of directing it towards the premier because of the whole fact that he believes in this public auto insurance, and he's clearly not happy that she's not going with it.
Well, that's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought as soon as you said Rick Bill, I just assumed that you were going to say that the audio insurance thing was Jody Gondek's fault.
You know what? Yeah, I'm surprised people haven't blamed the water break on arsonists.
Well, I think that's coming.
Yeah, no,
it's
absolutely.
It's early. We've just gotten to the WEF UN stage. Once that has a little bit of room to breathe, then we'll get into the arson and all of the other things. So
the Calgary hydro tyranny.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to mention was just it is so odd. Like, obviously, the Calgary communication that's just a whole gong show. But I'm kind of also surprised that we don't see a lot of the Alberta government. I mean, this is literally the largest city in the province, and they may not have access to water. This could dramatically affect people's lives in the most severe way. And you get a statement from Rick McIver
in quotes. In quotes, I loved that.
In quotes. Like where is the government on this beyond just saying, oh yeah, we support the city? It's like this is the exact kind of thing that people would expect Danielle Smith to jump out at. I mean, I know she had some sort of thing this weekend, so that's why she wasn't doing her radio show. But I mean, even then, it's just, you would think they would put like a face and be like, oh yeah, we're on the ground in Calgary, we're doing our best to help them, blah 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 blah. It's like radio silence.
I'm curious. So this is you raise a really good point, and I know that on the Twitter machine, we've been having a bit of fun with it. But do you know what she's up to this weekend? Because quite frankly, it blows my mind.
I honestly have no idea.
Okay, darn it! I thought you did. It blows my mind that there is an excavation, and I mean, there's certainly been no shortage of city leadership that has gone for the photo ops and the selfies and to show the support. I saw that yesterday. The mayor of Calgary said that she was spending Neighbor Day only in Bowness because that was the area that was primarily affected initially by you get no water for you. So there's definitely an argument to be made that this is an area where politicians who are concerned should maybe. I mean, I even saw, and I'm not dunking. I'm trying not to dunk too hard on them, but I saw that the Alberta Party had set up this cute little table where they were giving away water bottles to people who needed water in Bowness. So there's a lot of people who recognize that there's political opportunities and political responsibilities in this situation. I would make the argument, particularly given that the UCP recently said, hey, municipal governments, that's a real nice area of jurisdiction that you think you have there. It's ours now. That this would be an area where showing that they're invested in the emergency, showing that they're invested in making sure that all of that municipal thing is taken care of and that they care so hard. It is stunning to me that Smith spent multiple days in Calgary for the energy show and the Calgary Chamber event, and she didn't do this. And like, I'm looking at this weekend and I'm stunned that she still isn't there. Like, it almost feels like when Kenny went away during COVID and put Shandy in charge for a while there. No, it wasn't Shandy. It was LaGrange was in charge for a while there. It almost feels like where's the leadership at? Because the implications for this are direct. I just finished doing like 5 minutes on the Stampede shouldn't be a thing this year. Well, the Stampede is one of the biggest political fundraisers. So to have Danielle Smith pop her head in and be like, no, we're going to make this happen come hell or no water. It's stunning to me that she hasn't showed up yet.
Well, it's also a pattern when you think about it. I mean, when it comes to the E. coli thing, it took her 10 days to show up. When it came to power situation back in January when we had the big, deep freeze, she wasn't even in the province and she couldn't be bothered really. We just see this consistent pattern of the UCP and Daniel Smith in particular, just no showing when it comes to actual emergencies and actual situations that you would expect your government to show up at.
Yeah.
You can almost guarantee that you're more likely to see the Premier of Alberta comment on the same night about the Oilers before you're going to see her comment about an actual emergency.
Yeah. And that's to me, like, I'm just looking at her Twitter, and today she tweeted out how, she was super thrilled to do the Chamber of Commerce thing. That's where we pulled the video from about the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. But other than that, and a boilerplate tweet about Father's Day, there's nothing. It's been radio silence, for today at least. And so it's wild to me that like, how is the Premier of Alberta absent on this?
And you also think about this too. I mean, I don't want to say this to knock on wood here, but I don't know if this would be affected. But I'm assuming that if we were to have fires, that not having access to water would be a problem, especially at a time during. I mean, thank God this is happening in the summer. Imagine if the water break happened in winter. But even then, it's like, man, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, my thoughts ended there. But no, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Like I said, I don't know where she is, and I honestly don't know. Maybe they're spooked by the whole UCP rate going down, like the ledger poll.
But this would be like, it's a comms expression, and I think that even Don Braid covered this off. Any crisis is both a crisis and an opportunity, and if you know how to present yourself correctly, you can absolutely turn just about any crisis into an opportunity. And with the trending downward of the UCP numbers, combined with the fact that Calgary is one of the areas where the UCP definitely didn't overperform in the last provincial election, generating some goodwill and being able to take some of the credit for making the Stampede go ahead probably wouldn't be a bad idea if that's the demographic that you're aiming for, but she's not done that. So I don't know, man.
Wild stuff, but hey, I hope you have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for tagging in again. It's been a while. And with that, we're going to bring in Tammy. Hey, how's it going?
Not bad. So I have a very perhaps cynical, but I think accurate way of looking at this. The reason why the UCP, Danielle Smith, and all of her cronies aren't leaning in and trying to help with the water issue in Calgary is because that's not why they came up with their little, we're going to be able to take over the city government. That was not what that was about. That's totally about controlling and pushing out anyone left-leaning that they don't approve of. It's got nothing to do with making the Calgary City or Edmonton City better. It's about their control. And the fact that they didn't lean in and try to help with Calgary's water problems proves it.
I mean, there is an argument to be, you say that, and the thought that went through my head was just kind of like, you can envision the UCP caucus and cabinet going, whoa, not that kind of emergency.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's not the kind of emergency that they're worried about, right? It's you're right about how they could have leaned into this and made themselves look really good. Look at in the States, I can't even think. They used to call him whatever's mayor, the one that tied in with Trump. He used to be beloved. He was always that much of a jerk. But when all the stuff happened in that city, and I'm sorry my stroke is not giving me the words, even though I know the incident, he used to be beloved. But he was always ostensibly just as much of a jerk as he was now. But back then, he knew how to work it. He had the right comms and he stepped in at the right situation and made himself look good. The UCP could totally have done that. But that's not what their entire Bill 20 or whichever one it is about. It's about them being able to push out the people they don't approve of. And that's all it's about.
Or the crisis that they don't approve of. I suspect if the city of Calgary was to say, hey, I mean, I haven't looked at the COVID numbers in a while, so I can't speak to them off the top of my head. But if Calgary was to say, hey, the COVID numbers, they're getting bad, we want to do a state of emergency and another mask mandate, I suspect very strongly that
Absolutely.
you would see the province come in and go, no, you don't.
No, you're not. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's totally what they think of as, and unfortunately their supporters, mostly the rurals, but it's what they, and it's really a horrible thing of saying, and I know, but I used to be a rural, so I'm allowed. I just was one of the rurals who didn't agree with them. That's entirely what it's about. They don't really care that people are having to, if anything, you know what they're looking at this as? He. The fact that everybody's going down with water and it's all on Yodi, I can't say her name anyway.
Jyoti.
Thank you. It's all on her. Guess what? It means they're not going to vote for her next time. It's exactly what they're thinking. They're letting her dump. They're letting it drop because it means that someone they don't like is going to get hit. They're hoping.
You're probably not wrong. I got to let you know, the chat is lit up right now. Everybody in the chat wants you to know that it's Rudy Giuliani and 9/11 that they're pretty sure that you were referring to.
Thank you, guys.
I love the chat community that we have here. Like, we have this little group that shows up whenever we press the live button, and the conversations that happen, not just about the things that we're talking about during the show, but there's always these like little asides where everybody's checking on everybody, and I think it's just so fantastic. And
it is. That is awesome.
I love it.
But that's my theory, and I know it's really highly cynical, but with the UCP in charge, I can't help but think that my cynicism is probably accurate.
You're probably not wrong, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. But I'll let you go back, and whoever's the next one who wants to talk, thank you.
Sounds good.
Have a great night.
All right. I want to say, I think we have one other person who's in the queue, and then I'm going to do a little bit more of a thing, and then we'll wrap it up for this evening. Not a Lord of the Rings episode tonight. I love it. So we're going to bring in, looks like Parking Spaces is back this week.
Oh, I'm on. Oh, hello.
Hi there. What's going on, man?
Nothing much. I don't really have much, but I just wanted to bring up this fascinating thing I've noticed. One of the things I like to do is monitor these like far right groups because they're funny. That's not what I'm supposed to. What I was going to say, but one of the things I've been noticing is that there's this really huge, slow movement that's slowly building up. And to put it lightly, I will wonder, and I want to ask you, and heck, even the chat. I wonder how longer the United Conservative Party will stay united for long. As I'm monitoring, there's like, how do I say it's like there's the Take Back Alberta types, the old PC corporate types, and then there's the rural types. But I'm so anxious. But basically, there's I highly suspect there's probably gonna be a lot of division because I want to say it because I don't know how to say it since I'm autistic. I don't want to say it sounding mean, but like there's this really huge anti-immigrant statement I've noticing with certain right-wingers these days. Like, heck, I want you to, heck, if you can, like any of you in the chat, go to any tweets by David Parker or any like member like of the UCP or FART member community. You start to see a pattern in some tweets where there's a huge anti-immigrant statement. I'm trying to say, I'm trying to think of how I should say this because I have a tendency to say things the wrong way. But
You're doing fine.
All right, thank you. But I'm starting to really think that this anti-immigrant statement is going to really thwart things in a way I don't think people are even expecting, and it is growing huge because how do I say this? Like, whenever I used to have, well, I do. I have this uncle who's sort of all into that anti-vax convoy crap, like that type of person. But recently, they're starting to shift away from masks, heck, even queer people to immigrants. And the most shocking thing is that nobody's really talking about it because there was this subreddit. I think it was called Canadian Housing or something. I don't know what it was called, but it had a lot of members. It had a hugely massive anti-immigrant stance, and it got banned recently. And when you just look at certain right-wingers in the Canadian political sphere, you're starting to see a huge anti-immigrant statement. And I think, heck, I even think there's actually going to be protests planned about this soon if what I see on one of the subreddits is true. But basically, the point is what I'm going to say is there's a large majority of people, and I don't want to say this because I hate overall generalizing things, but a lot of people maybe in rural areas who aren't fans of immigrants. I'm going to be real. And I think the fact that not even the most right-leaning parties are talking about immigration is going to really enrage them because I saw this one tweet. It was about one of Parker's parental rights rallies, blah, 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 all that crap. But one of the tweets I saw was, queer theory's bad, but when are you going to talk about mass immigration? Because Parker's all about that mass immigration. And I really think that the UCP is going to have one big of a hassle because, like, if these people don't feel like they're going to be represented, they're going to probably split off, maybe something similar to the Wild Rose or something. I don't know. But basically, the longer Parker, these freedom people appeal to immigrants and, like, heck, even the UCP too, the larger that base is going to get enraged or feel not represented and leave or cause division or something like that. And I generally think if they continue, they're going to really regret pissing off their biggest base, which is rural people, because a lot of rural people are not too big on that. I'm trying my best not to sound mean, but like, I generally think the UCP is into a really bad trap soon if what I'm seeing is true. And I also want to probably get your thoughts on it and maybe see what the chat thinks too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can give you my quick thoughts on it. I think that there's definitely some dissent that's brewing within the UCP ranks. I mean, we had talked about doing a segment on the 1905 committee because they started with four people as the head of that committee. They lost Tim Hoven because apparently they never really had him. He issued a statement to that effect. There was another gentleman who definitely fits into the far right extremes. He was quietly removed from that committee as well. It seems like everybody involved with the committee, with the exception of Tim Hoven, are very frustrated and very disappointed with the performance of Danielle Smith. And there's certainly a lot of people who are expressing, she promised all of these things. She said to the righty right, that she was going to address all of these issues and do all of these things, and she failed to do so. So I definitely think that there's a risk for her flank on the right to be opened up. And this is where I'm going to try to put a little nuance on what you said. I hope that's okay.
Listen, I'm glad you're not taking what I'm saying wrong. I have a hard time trying to explain things.
Yeah, no worries. I think that it's important to highlight that, again, we talk about progressives. We talk about conservatives. There's a big difference, and there's a lot of delineation within those groups. So, there's the David Parker conservatives who are the more extreme. They lean into all of the fear mongering and all of that sort of thing. But there's a lot of people, and this is, I take a look at somebody like Thomas Lukasik, for example, who, I mean, when you want to talk about PC cred, that guy, it was the deputy premier for a PC government. He was the minister on multiple occasions. He was a part of the PC institution. And this is a guy who has looked at what the UCP have become under Take Back Alberta, because again, let's not forget that the board of the UCP is entirely comprised of, at the very least, former, if not current, Take Back Alberta candidates, or Take Back Alberta endorsed candidates. He took a look at the UCP and said, yeah, this is not conservatism anymore. I am still a conservative, but this ain't that. So I'm going to lend my vote to the NDP. Now it's up for some debate whether or not the NDP has moved far enough to the center or the right to be in the same realm as the progressive conservatives. I don't want to have that debate tonight. But there definitely has been some migration. So I think that the challenge that I would throw to conservatives, particularly when we're talking about these issues like immigration that are for sure hyperbolic and for sure have some clauses.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're valid. I'm just saying that there's just a growing sentiment I'm noticing that I think has the potential to be very massive if these people, like these certain types of people in power, don't really recognize it.
Well, I think that, this is where I'm going to throw it back to what Shannon Phillips said in the video clip that we played earlier. There is a section of the right that has figured out how to get loud. And because the average person doesn't like to get loud, it's uncomfortable. People are looking at me and some of them are disagreeing with me. I don't like this at all. I'm going to not be loud. Because they have figured out how to be so loud, so always, they've been able to make it look like they have more momentum than they do. But one of the dangers of that, in my opinion, is when people perceive momentum, there is always going to be a growing number of them that try to align with that momentum. And that's where the danger is, because you have people who will look at the perceived growing momentum of some of this racism and bigotry and go, oh, well, maybe there's something to it. And that's where it starts to get really, really dangerous. And this is where I would say to anybody who calls themselves a conservative, whether or not you're a progressive conservative or a little bit more conservative-y than that, it is your responsibility to separate yourself from those people. It's your responsibility to condemn those views. I think the reason why, when Shannon Phillips was talking about how people haven't figured out how to crack this nut yet, it's because we're we are en masse afraid to call it out and to say, hey, not you. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but your views are gross and they're hateful. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm not going to go to the same parties that you go to. And I'm going to let my friends know as well that you're racist, homophobic, whatever. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to end on this note. One of the things that I absolutely love is there's a pseudo punk singer, folk punk, I guess I would probably call him, named Frank Turner, and he's got a song called "Make America Great Again." And a lot of people go, ugh, but the song is actually flipping the idea of making America great again. The chorus of the song is, let's make America great again by making racists ashamed again. Let's make compassion in fashion again. Let's make America great again. And I think that those lyrics absolutely could and should apply to the province of Alberta. And that's what I have to say about that. We're going to wrap the show up for tonight.
Thank you for letting me on. Is it okay if I have one closing statement?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I generally think it's going to be very interesting. Like, I definitely agree. And I will say, if there's one thing I'd suggest to anyone listening, and heck, even you, if there's one thing I've noticed with these types of people and like pundits, whatever, the thing they want is for you to be upset, plain and simple. What I see working in certain areas that we are kind of facing, I don't know how to say it, but basically, these figures, these racist bigots or whatever, they want you to get upset. Don't get upset. Just laugh, like laugh at them. Fucking just don't even give them something, because what these people want is validation for their beliefs, and once you take their validation away, they have nothing left. And I'll say that, and I think some interesting stuff is going to happen if what I see is correct. And thank you, Nate, for letting me on. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, man. The only thing I'll tag on to that, because I'm the host and I'm allowed to before I shut things down. The only thing I'll tag on to that is that there are sometimes things worth getting upset over. That's one of the reasons why the rage farming and the anger is weaponized as aggressively as it is. So I would say don't not get angry, but just make sure you're getting angry about the right things and things that are real and actually happening. That's it for tonight. I want to say thank you to everybody who is in the chat tonight. You guys are awesome. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's listening on the Twitter Spaces, or if you're watching on any of the streaming platforms. Thank you so much for hanging out. I love the interactions of the live show are one of the things that make this so much fun for me. But if you're listening to the podcast or watching the videos after the fact as well, hey, thanks for that doing that too. We have some interviews coming up. We're going to be talking about, we're going to be going through all of the big bills the UCP passed now that the dust has settled, and there's the opportunity for some perspective. We're going to be talking with that about a political expert. I'm not going to drop the name yet because I never drop the names until the videos are recorded. We're hoping to have a conversation about some of the religious things that are going on in schools and the government, because there's some questions that should probably be asked there. Again, not dropping the names, but those are going to be coming, and a whole lot more. We got a lot planned. It's going to be a busy little summer. So, as always, if you want to have early access to that and the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that you're supporting a program that is endlessly frustrating to certainly the Premier of Alberta and many of her staff, because we hear her stories. You can sign up to do that at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com. If you don't like the Patreon, that's okay. You can send to the e-transfer at the info at the breakdown ab.ca, and then abpoly.ca for all the merch and the things and the stuff. That's everything that we got. Everybody have a great rest of the weekend. I think you get another hour and a half of it. Stay safe this week, especially if you're in Calgary. Again, I just want to reiterate, just try to use less water. It's not that hard. Like, one of the things that we started doing in my house is we got like, when you go have a shower and the water comes out cold and that's miserable, we got a little bucket that we're putting in there. And so the bucket fills up with water while it warms up. And then we put the bucket in the things, and then we get to water the things. So there's lots of creative solutions. I want to say Drew Farrell, former Calgary City Councilor Drew Farrell, she has been curating some conversations on water conservation that are definitely worth checking out on the Twitter machine as well. So there's my public service announcement for the weekend. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. And as always, keep the conversation going.